And now it's time to continue with the first presentation, the keynote speech, which will be held by Mr. Lee from ILO, who joins us online. He is the director of the Employment Policy Department. And Mr. Lee will give an overview of the current situation of the labor market and best challenges in relation to that. So I hope that Mr. Lee is with us. Yes, he is. Mr. Lee, the online stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair. The Minister of the Health and the Labor of Estonia, Mr. Tanel Kik, and Head of the Management Board of the Estini, Tutukasa, Mr. Melis Pavel, and the new re-elected President of WWC, Mr. Mohamed Aksik, and your leadership team, and distinguished participants, and ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the ILO, let me first congratulate Mr. Mohamed Aksik for being re-elected to lead the organization as the president of the WWC, which is a clear demonstration of the confidence the members have in you and also the Moroccan Public Employment Service. We very much look forward to strengthening the collaboration and working with you reps under your leadership. I also want to thank the organizers for inviting me to this prestigious event. It is my immense pleasure to speak to you today on the subject of the Public Employment Service challenges and innovative actions. I need to move to the next slide, or can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you so much. I would like to organize my presentation in three parts. First, as the world of work continues to go through a wave of the crisis, unfortunately, including the latest and the current Ukraine crisis, I want to discuss what disruption have already been made during the pandemic. And then I want to present a high-level overview of where are the fault lines and what needs to be done. And after this actually broad overview, I'm planning to zoom in the issues of a public employment service in terms of the challenges and innovative solution and actions. Next slide, please. Okay, now, let's get back to the year of 2020 when the pandemic began and causing massive disruption to the world of work. I think we can characterize this disruption along with the three features. The first, disruption were devastating in size and nature. The pandemic caused the most severe crisis for the world of work since the Great Depression of the 1930s. In our estimation, its impact is already 4 times greater than that of the global financial crisis in 2008. And the working hours were lost by 8.8%, which was equivalent to the 255 million full-time jobs. Of course, this loss came from different sources. About half of the losses actually was related to shorter working hours for those in employment. And another half came from the unprecedented level of employment losses, around 114 million people. Also importantly, a greater majority of these employment losses, about 71%, has translated into inactivities, not unemployment. As you know very well, unemployment considers only those people who actually stay in the labor market are seeking jobs. So actually the unemployment figure at the time, and also even now, is not the best indicators for the scale of the labor market disruption we have seen. The second, disadvantaged and vulnerable groups, the people suffered more than anybody else. And they include women, youth, and informal workers, and also low-paid and low-skilled, and among others. And low-skilled workers saw the large losses, typically by more than 10%, while the high-skilled workers, on average, didn't see much losses. Third, this is important, all countries responded seriously very quickly, as you know very well, but still, there was huge differences in terms of magnitude of the responses. For instance, in our estimation, for every loss in working hours in high-income countries, actually introduced fiscal stimulus equivalent to 1 hour. So 1 hour to matches to 1 hour equivalent response, so one-to-one match. But when it comes to developing countries, the ratio is often less than 10%. So this disparity is indeed one of the most critical global issues today. Next slide, please. Now, what about the next? Next slide, please? Thank you. What about the last year, 2021? Actually, last year we began to see some recovery in the beginning, but in the end, stalled in the second half of the year, as you can see from the chart on the left side of the screen. And this global picture actually masks the diverging trend once again between developed and developing countries. As you can see from the chart on the right side of the screen, developed countries recovered rather quickly, even towards the pre-pandemic level, while developing countries were either stagnating or even suffering further setback last year. So in essence, the last year we saw the beginning of the two-speed recovery or the dangerous divergence, which unfortunately continues this year. So overall, the prospect of this year, 2022, are not very encouraging either. Some early recovery gains we saw in the beginning of this year seems to have been wiped out by the economic and financial difficulties driven by the ongoing Ukraine crisis. Next slide, please. Then what went wrong? Of course, there are so many different factors here, but let me point out the two important fault lines, which basically underlines the uneven impacts and the recovery between developed and developing countries, as I mentioned. So they are basically related to the different speed in the vaccination rollout and also different magnitude of fiscal stimulus. As you know, for the last 2 years, vaccination helped, but at the same time, vaccination divided the world. Low-income countries continue to have difficulties with access to the vaccination, which contributes to keeping very stringent workplace restrictions in place for long in developing countries. And at the same time, the weak fiscal capacity in developing countries, which made it very difficult for governments to introduce supportive measures for workers and business, that was another factor. As I said before, the world actually mobilized unprecedented resources to stimulate the economy and jobs. But as you can see from the chart on the right side of the screen, these stimulus measures were largely confined to advance the economy. Next slide, please. So indeed, our analysis confirms all of this. Actually, our latest econometric analysis basically shows two things. Number one, for fiscal stimulus of the 1% of the annual GDP was positively associated with 0.3 percentage points in working hours. So there is a positive correlation between fiscal stimulus and also the working hour recovery after all other relevant factors being controlled. So when we move to the vaccination, we have a similar story. In our estimation, basically shows 10 percentage point increase in vaccination rates was associated with 1.9% increase in working hours. So this increase meaning about the 52 million full-time jobs. So next slide, please. So then another important policy gap here is how to support workers and business in transition to where we have new opportunities for jobs. Let me take the example of just transition. Our recent analysis, which was done before the pandemic, but they basically suggest that there are potential of creating 25 million jobs through investing in the green sector. However, in doing so, we have two major issues. The first, in order to materialize this potential job creation, we need to train 20 million of the people to get ready for the new job opportunities. But at the same time, our strategic move to the green sector would inevitably destroy around 7 million of jobs. So which means we need to move those affected workers to new opportunities. So here comes the question of the reallocation, in which, of course, the roles of the public employment service is immensely important. Next slide, please. So another issue, as you can imagine, is social protection. The pandemic and the other crises this year is basically a wake-up call for the crucial importance of the social protection. Despite all some good progress we have made in recent years, but still so many workers remain excluded from social protection. In our current estimation, the number is about the 4.1 billion people now. So it is imperative to fill this gap as a matter of urgency, but at the same time, this requires intensive and large resources, which requires a minimum 1.2 trillion US dollars. So it's a big money. So also, in order to ensure the social protection provides pathway to decent opportunities for those who want them, also it's important we need to link social protection to social protection program, particularly the public employment service. Next slide, please. So now, I think I don't need to stress to this audience all these global development have created new challenges and also opportunities for the public employment service, on top of the profound transformation on many fronts. I mean, we have discussed this before. As you know, all the mega trend related to the future work had impact directly on the public employment service and other service providers. So public employment service needs to adjust in order to remain relevant as a central player in the labor market, but also to reorient actually the services to help better serve workers and to manage the transition and cushion them against the shocks. More importantly, given the mandate of public employment service, one can argue public employment service can facilitate the labor market change and adjustment in a more active way. And when it comes to climate change and also COVID-19 crisis and technology and digitalization, all of this, these all leads to structural shift in the employment skills. Some jobs and occupations disappear, and skills may be obsolete, and new ones being created, and while many others are changing. The importance of the digital and green and blue economies, for example, demand an enhanced mastery of the skills anticipation and occupational changes, as well as the need to ensure portabilities and the coverage of the social protection. That's all essential element for smooth transition for workers. So our recent study conducted in 2020 among the public employment service globally has a very interesting finding. I mean, this is thanks to the Eurosport as well. In our survey, basically say all the public employment services have adopted technology in one form or another. Of course, countries are at the different level of development, hence the extent to which the service design and delivery has been digitalized is different. But technology is no doubt a key enabler for the service enhancement, outreach to the vulnerable groups, and maybe the key tool for developing countries to leapfrog at their services. The survey found very interestingly that 28% of the public employment service had adopted predominantly technology-based service delivery, and another 52% had a bit of the mixed, varied mixture of the both rather traditional one and also tech-based, while a significant 20% actually remain somehow focused on the face-to-face delivery models. These findings, in my view, points to the overriding lessons, which is the technology adoption in public employment service needs to be aligned with the level of development of countries, including digital infrastructure and digital skills among the clients, and also capacity of the public employment service, as well as the cultural norms, of course. So a clear digitalization strategy is therefore an important step to begin with. Well, what about the demographic shift, which actually present different challenges in different regions in most developing and emerging countries? I mean, it sometimes leads to the youth words, which can be as an advantage if the country can create adequate, productive, and decent jobs for them, and in doing so, to reaping the demographic dividend. But otherwise, the compounded crisis like the pandemic or other crises we are seeing today, youth words can create the economic and social problems rather than advantage if necessary policy and labor market measures are not implemented successfully. And the last but not least, I mean, the social dialogue, I really want to emphasize this as well. As you know, this labor market is becoming more vulnerable due to future of work-related issues and impact of crisis. But social dialogue is still, not still, it's more relevant than ever to have an inclusive labor market and support transition effectively. But this also may be threatened. I mean, it's not an easy job. The social dialogue is not an easy job, but it may be threatened by the current trend as many countries are struggling to mitigate immediate kind of negative impacts on the economy and society. Next slide, please. So then how exactly how can we actually strengthen public employment service in the current circumstances, especially when many countries are going through the crisis, which actually disrupt the people's livelihood? I think one of the issues for public employment service in this respect is how to make the active labor market policies stronger, particularly through the creating better linkages with income support. I think we can consider here the many different elements. For instance, designing a comprehensive package of the active market policies in tandem with income support to protect the people against the falls in the living standards and connecting them to jobs and equipping them with the skills needed to thrive as the economy recovers. Another one is the ensuring the income support is the employment-friendly and well-integrated with the active labor market policies. I think this will encourage and also enable the unemployed and low-paid workers to engage in effective job search and also training to obtain good quality jobs, and also aims to reintegrate the inactive people into the labor market. Third, I think we can consider also developing agile and resilient and coordinated employment and social protection service delivery and also policy responses. Of course, this can include using shared integrated registries and database, and also paying particular attention to how digital technology can facilitate coverage and cost effectiveness while promoting digital inclusion, as I mentioned before. We can also consider investing further in enhancing social protection and public employment service institutional capacities, coordinated in income support measures and active labor market policies in order to ensure a continuation of the adequate support for large numbers of people, and also to facilitate the reallocation of workers from declining to growing sectors like green sectors, given the unlikely persistence of the depressed condition in some sectors. Last but not least, I mean, again, we can also consider strengthening cooperation channels between stakeholders and promoting responsive regulatory and organizational framework of income support and active labor market provisions, which enable effective and agile active responses to changes in the labor market needs. Next slide, please. I think what I have said so far. Next slide, please. I mean, they are, or perhaps something all of you in this Congress may easily agree. Can I have the next slide, please? Then what about the reality and practice, and more specifically, what actually public employment service institutions have done during the pandemic? That's a bit of reality check for all of us. Here, I think it is useful to see the result of the, once again, Public Employment Service survey, which was done last year. First one important result to share with you is that the ensuring adequate funding of the active labor policies and public employment service is really, really crucial. The survey shows that the majority of the public employment service had their budget increased to cope with the pandemic. That's obviously something you can expect. However, almost a fifth, that's like 20%, had their budget decreased, and in small proportion of the public employment service, the budget remained unchanged. So this is a bit of a mixed picture. The second, the importance of diversifying the sources of funding to strengthen the resilience. In a clear majority of public employment services, the main source of funding actually comes from the ministry responsible for the labor and employment. So for this reason, quite often, they are quite vulnerable to the fiscal policies in their countries. Third, there is some general trend for an integrated service delivery in the implementation of active labor policies. This is really welcome news. And this is done as kind of the package to address the multiple barriers to employment. So evidence, from the studies, is very, very clear. Integrated delivery is more effective. And when it comes to labor market information, we believe the labor market, the information in a more granular manner is more critical than ever to enable public employment service, actually labor market adjustment, especially with respect to the identifying, shrinking, and expanding sectors and jobs and occupation and skills. This is what the survey tells us. So next slide, please. So I have 2 more slides to cover, and then I will conclude. Also, interestingly, the survey shows that the role of the public employment service is more and more important in skills development, especially in the context of technological changes and just transition. I think I mentioned this already a couple of times. Survey also confirms the smooth reallocation of resources to the most productive activities and helping workers in the transition process and closing the digital divide for firms and households. They're also very, very important. In response to the COVID-19 crisis, actually, in practice, the public employment service intensified their roles in both the upskilling and also reskilling. Reskilling, career guidance, enhancing digital skills to promote access to the labor service to the disadvantaged, for example, as well as the developing core skills featured highly. So internally, public employment service also focus on the building the capacity of the staff to be able to respond to the changes in the labor market and ably assist their clients to adapt. So overall, the public employment service has done much of the work, innovative actions, etc. So this is something quite, I personally very much impressed by and encouraged by the survey result. So next slide, please. So this is my last slide. To sum up, I think it's clear public employment service needs to invest in the future work capacities and capabilities to deliver successful transitions, especially in recovery processes. Can I have the last slide, please? In this respect, I would suggest considering the following. That is a bit of my takeaway message for all the distinguished participants at the Congress. The first, integrate the policy intervention to ensure people stay connected with the labor market throughout their working lives. In particular, those who actually social backgrounds put them at the risk of exclusion. That's a very important point. Integrated policy intervention. The second is about the strong links with the social protection mechanism, which provide workers with the stability through the transition between jobs and careers and different types of the contracts and the working modality. Third is as I mentioned earlier, is about the technology, which is the enabler and great tool for enhancing the effectiveness and also efficiency of the employment services, including our reach to the vulnerable groups. Nonetheless, its adoption in the public employment service needs to be aligned with the level of employment development of the country, which I mentioned already, and also the capacity of a public employment service as well as the cultural norms. A clear digitalization strategy is therefore an important step to begin with. Let's think about something like measures to ensure that technology does not lead to further exclusion of the marginalized groups. Fourth element is about the co-design of journey map. The service provision, as you know very well, is now moving away from the prescriptive approaches to the formulation of the journey maps, which actually not only takes a lifelong perspective to removing barriers to employment and foster adaptability to changing skills demand, but also involves the different stakeholders, including the beneficiaries of the services in the design of the program. The fifth element is the building resilience. This means we need actual service and policies sufficiently flexible to adapt to evolving the circumstances that are a bit difficult to anticipate. Climate and health-related risk, for example. It also refers to the proactive spending that really helps people navigate in different labor market circumstances and throughout their working lives. Last but not least, effective social dialogue, which is all related to the co-design of journey maps. And once again, the social dialogue is somehow helping us a lot in ensuring the buy-in of the beneficiaries and also the customization of services to the actual needs of the individuals and address the implementation challenges. So that's all I have to say. Many thanks for your kind attention. I very much look forward to your questions and comments and suggestions. Thank you so much. Chair, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. And now it's time for questions. So if you'd like to ask something from Mr. Lee, please raise up your hand and we will give you the microphone for the question. This is once in a lifetime opportunity.
Good morning, colleagues. Mr. Lee, you presented to us that the recovery has stalled in the second half of 2021, and you also presented 2 fault lines. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit with us about your thoughts on the lack of skilled workers, which can also prevent economies in growing. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very important question. This is certainly the questions that many countries are struggling with at the moment. I think we can consider 2 things here. One is a bit for clarifying the situation in the second half of last year where the overall recovery stalled. This is because the polarized situation between the advanced and developing countries. As I said, advanced countries, they recover very quickly, even up to the point where people start to worry about the labor shortage. The second is by contrast, the situation is the opposite in developing countries, and so they are suffering. So globally speaking, if you can put all these numbers together, it looks like globally speaking, the overall recovery is stalled. This is very important implication for the skills actually, and also labor shortage issues here. The one real issue, as I mentioned before, is that the in advanced countries in particular, and also as well as developed countries, the many workers who actually lost job, they decided to move out of the labor market and became inactive, which means their human capital, for example, all the skills can be easily either obsolete or outdated. That's number one. The second, those actually people who are on the job, I mean, they are considering to move to another job. So like, for example, the tourism sectors and also the health sectors and also all other service sectors, I mean, workers actually considering moving out of the current job or occupation to take new opportunities. So all of these elements basically indicating, and also you have to consider huge disruption to the training and skills in many advanced countries. So if we can put, this actually three pieces together, I must say we have a really serious problem with the skill shortage in this sense. And of course, the many countries now trying to provide a better training and skills opportunity, but I think they are kind of still remains suboptimal level. I think we need more active actions in this as well. So what I want to say here is to all the participants in the Congress, I think public employment service can really, I mean, that is what actually the pandemic taught us. The public employment service can really important role in actually promoting and also strengthening all the facilitating skills development. I think there is a really greater role by the public employment service in actually addressing, increasing or even growing the skills gap or skill message. I'll stop there. Over to you, Chair. Thank you.
Please give the microphone to the gentleman.
Merci, Michael. Il est vrai que les femmes doivent être...
Thank you, Michael.
Merci, Monsieur.
So women also have to take the floor. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lee, for your thorough presentation. I have a question about those sectors who are under pressure at the moment. What do you think about this little competition going on between various countries here for human resources or other resources from another countries, whether it's technology, in the sector of technology, IT, or perhaps the uneven distribution of competencies between countries?
Avec des mesures pour venir prendre la ressource qui est formée dans un pays.
Let's say one country has more resources and another country perhaps wants to take use of these resources. What do you think?
Thank you so much. That is very, very important, the question. I think your question have some different elements we have to consider very carefully. Number one is as I mentioned, there is also very uneven impact across different sectors. For instance, I mean, the service or retail and tourism, all those sectors, also the restaurant, accommodation, all these sectors were hit really hard. But at the same time, you mentioned IT sectors, for example. IT sectors actually managed to grow. And so we see actually net job gains in those sectors in many countries. And of course, the wages and incomes were growing as well. But once again, as you said, I mean, the IT sectors are dominated by rather small group of countries or the companies at the moment. So that actually creates a bit of sort of the monopoly, if you like, or oligarchical actually structures, which actually create a bit of a high rents, that's economic terms for those sectors, and also the workers as well. So what can we do about that situation? Number one, when you look at the hardest sectors, I really think, I mean, these sectors will go through quite a significant magnitude of the restructuring or reorganization in the years to come. I don't think I do think the many workers in those sectors will or are trying to move out of those sectors to seek for new opportunities. Of course, there is some attempts to some sectors to improve the working conditions in order to keep actually those workers in those sectors, but I think it may have a limited impact. So, which means, especially for public employment service, I mean, this how can it help actually these workers to move on to the other sectors is going to be important issues, but they typically want to move on to the jobs in other sectors with the more high valued and more skilled. So there is two elements there. I mean, skills and training in one part, and also the matching services, and also a bit of career guidance will be important. And the IT sectors is another issue because in our analysis, of course, many countries trying to train the workers for the IT-related occupations, but at the same time, many countries having a bit of difficulties to grow or promote actually those occupations in their economy, as given the many advanced countries basically dominate in all the sectors right now. I mean, but this is a little bit beyond the normally conventional area of the labor market policy. It has much to do with the global competition policies and tax policies, all these things. I think unless we see some dramatic actual breakthrough at the global level about the IT sectors in terms of the competition structures and others, I'm afraid we will not be able to expect some significant changes in the current structures. That's why I very much look forward to seeing some changes, especially through the G20 discussion, for example, and other places. But at the same time, public employment service will once again continue to raise these questions and for their attention. At the same time, as I said, public employment service can play a significant role in get workers prepared and supporting them in this transition process to the IT sector in too large extent. Thank you.
Good morning, dear colleagues. Good morning, dear colleagues. Good morning, Sangheon Lee. I don't know if we have a camera here or if you are speaking in the off. This is Michael van der Kammer of the German Public Employment Service, the Bundesagentur. I was particularly pleased to find one of the slides dealing with the 3 Ds, you know, with the climate change, etc., also the COVID crisis. And you also said this is one of the topics that especially the European Public Employment Service are discussing already with each other. This is a topic definitely for the Public Employment Service. You also mentioned on that slide that there would be a threat to social dialogue. Could you elaborate a bit on that and also say from your perspective what the role of the public employment services could be here? Thank you very much. And also thank you for the very good input.
Thank you so much, Michael. I mentioned especially the ILO normally characterized as the just transition when it comes to ensuring all the workers had the fair and decent opportunity to contribute to the climate changes. I mean, this is particularly important, but at the same time, challenging topic for the public employment service because the just transition basically requires, I must say, quite a sometimes large magnitude of the changes moving. I mean, I don't know in Germany, but we estimate. I mean, normally. In Europe, even we believe that tens of the millions of workers are expected to move from one place or one occupation to the another. And we know there are many challenges there. One is, of course, the skill issues. And the second is, as you know, in Europe, for example, workers are necessarily in favor of the idea of the moving geographically to other jobs. That's another. So there are so many challenges in terms of mobility. So workers actually just not move like the capital moves. So there are all kinds, you have families and communities. There are lots of elements, also the human elements into it. So how can he help the workers in those situations, especially through the corporate employment service? It's going to be a very important question. And also, as I mentioned, the sheer magnitude of changes we are talking about is really big as well. That has implication for social dialogue, as you mentioned. There are two issues. One is in the crisis mode, everything is quick and urgent. So the government tends to set up these, introduce the measures as soon as possible. So in a rush, and so there is not much time, in their view, for the engaged social dialogue. That's why the social dialogue can be a sort of something you can skip all the time. But at the same time, we have seen some good examples like Italy. They came up with a tripartite agreement right away after the pandemic. So there is some challenge because of relating to time pressure and etc. And also there is a good example. Still, despite all the constraints, we can make it happen. And the second element is more time-related issues. The second is more the structural issues. As I said, the social dialogue, when it comes to the green transition or just transition, or even the digital transition, we are moving the workers from one sector to the another, meaning there is not necessarily the same understanding and same views within trade unions workers and also within employers, for example. There seems to be some conflicts of interest or even tensions among workers and also among employers. So, of course, between workers and employers. And also government, even sometimes depending on what ministry you are talking about, there is not necessarily the same or consolidated views about how to manage this transition within the government, for example. Think about the Ministry of Labor on the one hand, industry, and also the environment ministries, for example. So in that context, this is kind of when you organize social dialogue on these issues, this is a far more complex than actually conventional social dialogue we have. So there are different elements to play out. That's why it took quite a long time, to be frank, for even our social partners to come up with certain positions and the guidance on how they're going to organize themselves about this transition. So that is, I just hinted at some of the complex elements of the social dialogue on these issues, but I am cautiously confident that as time goes by and our social partners and our government will find a way of better organizing social dialogue because we have no other way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. As the time is tight, I'm sorry to say, but we cannot take any more questions. It's time for a coffee break for 30 minutes. We're gonna meet each other here at 11:15 in the same room. And during the break, I recommend you to visit also the marketplace. It is in the expo area where some companies and organizations present their products and work. So have a nice interaction time and see you soon.